Sylvester Stewart, better known as Sly Stone, has died at the age of 82. I cannot overstate how important this musician was in terms of pop music, in terms of funk, in terms of soul, and in terms of jazz rock fusion. On this video, I want to pay tribute to him and I want to explain why he was such an important musician and why perhaps he is not seen in the same pantheon of musicians as a James Brown or a Bob Dylan, or a Stevie Wonder. Sly Stone was born Sylvester Stewart to a middle-class black family in 1943. His family was not only middle class, but they were deeply religious, and he was brought up with his brothers and sisters into an environment where there was a lot of music and a lot of religion. And so by the mid-50s, he was performing and recording, I believe, with his siblings, creating gospel music. By the mid-60s, this band had coalesced into what became known as Sly and the Family Stone, keeping two of his siblings, Freddie Stone and his sister Rose. This is where the band gets its name. In 1966, they brought their first album out, which was not much of a success, but then they followed that up with the single Dance to the Music. This became a huge success worldwide. And then after the release of their, I think, 67 album, Stand, which included the hit single Everyday People, Sly and the Family Stone became one of the biggest pop acts in the world. That album sold an incredible 3 million copies. The band he had was a very interesting band because it was a multiracial band. It also contained the incredible Larry Graham on bass, who came in with a unique style that he pretty much invented himself, which was slap bass. By the end of the 60s, they had had a huge hit with Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, which featured some incredible funky slap bass, although you can hear him thumping at least on their debut hit single, Dance to the Music. By the 1970s, Sly Stone was pulling in the band, and in the studio was creating the music much more himself. His classic 1971 album, There's a Riot Going On, although under the name Sly and the Family Stone, is pretty much a solo album with Sly working over a drum machine and creating the songs with overdubbing, but using the members of the band. That album's notable for being the first major label album to feature a drum machine, and the hit single off that, Family Affair, being the first single to feature a drum machine. But as the 70s progressed, Sly Stone's increasing drug use made his behaviour more and more erratic. His career slowly spiraled down, and by the 1980s, people would not book him because of the fact that he would often walk off stage halfway through, wouldn't turn up to gigs. And I think the title, There's a Riot Going On, sort of points to the fact that, many a Sly and the Family Stone gig would end up with some sort of complaints from the audience, because Sly had wandered off saying he needed the toilet and then never come back. And he never really gets back on track, throughout the 80s and 90s. There's sporadic appearances here and there. By a certain point in time, he's homeless, and I think he's living in his car outside some family that are looking after him, letting him come in and use the toilet and the shower. He takes his manager to court at one point and files for $5 million of unpaid royalties, which he originally wins and then doesn't win. He seems to have been diddled by bad business practice. And we have never really seen him come anywhere near that early success that he had in the late 60s. So we're really dealing with a guy that had a career of importance from 66 to 73. So that's a 7-year period. So why is he so important? Well, as I think George Clinton said, I think it was George Clinton, he said that James Brown invented funk, but Sly Stone perfected funk, and that's definitely the case. And when you listen to Sly Stone's take on the funk, it's so much more richer, it's so much wider in its vocabulary, it explores so much more areas, it utilises the bass and the drums and the guitar, brass section, backing vocals in ways that are absolutely unique. Sly Stone was always playing with the form. So if you take Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, or Everyday People, or Family Affair, they're all funky, but they're all entirely different. He's also very interesting in his exploration of civil rights issues. If you think of the track Don't Call Me N-Word Whitey, that is an incredibly brave tune to play, which basically tries to capture the sort of racist banter between a white person and a black person. So his lyrics were heavy, his songwriting was heavy, the music was heavy. And because I think it was a multiracial band, it seems to have influenced music far wider than just soul and funk. I'll tell two stories of how wide his influence was. I can remember chatting to the great drummer Steve White, who was the drummer with the Style Council and with Paul Weller. And when he was a young man, he managed to get a drum lesson with the drummer Bill Bruford, who obviously is a progressive rock drummer, played with Yes and King Crimson. He said the first thing that happened when he turned up at Bill Bruford's house was Mr. Bruford made him a cup of tea and sat him down and then played him Sly and the Family Stone. And then he was looking at Stephen, the young Stephen White, looking at him saying, do you get this? Do you get it? Do you get it? And so we can see how those rhythms were influencing a drummer like Bill Bruford. And actually, if you listen to Bruford playing in Yes and King Crimson, there's a funk and a groove there, which is now missing from modern progressive rock. And that's coming directly from Sly and the Family Stone. In 1970, John McLaughlin turned up to the studio to make an album that went on to be called Jack Johnson with Miles Davis. This album really is the beginning of jazz rock fusion. The musicians at that time, who were jazz musicians, were trying to find a way in. How do you mix rock and jazz? How do you do it? And albums like Bitches Brewing in the Silent Way have been credited as if into that genre, but I don't hear it. But I hear it on Jack Johnson. That for me is where it starts. John McLaughlin actually was in the studio and had been told not to play by Miles Davis, and they couldn't help but start to jam. And him and Billy Cobham started to jam on a Sly Stone tune. And there is a riff that permeates the early Miles Davis group and the Mabish Juncture, the one that goes... That is a Sly Stone riff. So we can see he also played a huge part in the development of jazz rock. His influence on people like Prince cannot be overstated. I mean, Sly Stone basically is the guy that Prince modelled his career on. So when you hear all that stuff in the 1980s, that's Sly Stone. And when you listen to a group like George Clinton's Parliament Funkadelic, that's Sly Stone. Sly Stone, in terms of artists playing in the mid to late 60s, is up there in influence with the Beatles, with the Rolling Stones, with James Brown. he's up there. And the reason why he's not a household name is because of his erratic behaviour and his inability to really come back with anything of note. The only one thing I can think of which is of note was in the early 80s he made an album with George Clinton's Parliament Funkadelic called The Electric Spanking of War Babies. And I've got a few things where he turns up here and there. We were all waiting for something to happen. We were all waiting for that return to form, and it never really happened. But in a way, that makes what he did even more special. He's been a very mysterious figure, over the last few decades. An erratic, crazy sort of musical genius. There's been many of these over the years, and Sly Stone was definitely in the eccentric category. He has left a legacy musically. If you don't know his music, go and put Stand on now, that album, and have a listen to it. And when you get to side 2's 13-minute Sex Machine, you will see that he is exploring stuff back in '67 that nobody else was exploring. I can hear his influence on people like Jimi Hendrix. I can hear his influence on people like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's very, very wide what he did. Obviously, his influence to hip hop and rap cannot be overstated. The trumpet player Cynthia Robinson also would sort of answer Sly's vocals in the background, throwing in, encouragement. This is a staple of hip hop. I think it's called the Wingman, which Flavor Flav acts as to Chuck D. That also, which comes from gospel music, is embodied in music and commercial music by Sly Stone. I can't tell you how important he is. For me, in the music I love, and people talk about the Velvet Underground, and they'll talk about all these other bands that are so important to music. For me, it's musicians like Sly Stone, Ike Turner, James Brown. These are the musicians that create the music we listen to, or at least create the music I listen to. And the one guy that I don't think gets mentioned enough is Sly Stone. It's 5 o'clock in the morning here. It's early. You can hear I've got a croaky voice. I've just managed to haul myself out of bed. I did that because I knew that I had to go and make this video straight away. Before I'd even thought about it, I just wanted to come, switch the camera on and say what I thought. This is one of the heavyweights. Sly's one of the heavyweights. And we wouldn't have the music we have now if he hadn't have been around. And I think his biggest influence on music was opening up and creating a bridge between black popular music and white popular music. So I think when we look at popular music in the 90s and 80s, especially American popular music, and we look at the big likes of Madonna and Prince and Michael Jackson, that music is far more influenced by Sly Stone than it is any other group from the 1960s. Perhaps the Beatles play a part as well, perhaps. But in the actual sound, it's Sly Stone. I love his stuff. I have for years. I first saw him when I was a young man, when I stayed up with my dad to watch the Woodstock music film. His performance was electrifying. One of the things that struck me when I watched that was that a lot of the other bands, it was live and it was chaotic, and the performances were very exciting in some cases. Santana, The Who, Hendrix. But Sly Stone's performance just was so on, it was so tight. It was so in the zone. Again, I don't know why his performance at Woodstock hasn't gone down as one of the classic performances. For me as a kid, that was one of the highlights of that film. So, rest in peace, Mr. Stewart. I'm a big fan, and many people are huge fans. I'm sure this video will be greeted by such. We haven't been told the cause of death, but I think he had COPD, he seemed to have knackered his lungs up. I wonder how that had happened. Probably maybe a crack cocaine, heavy drug user. Amazing that he got to such an advanced age, really. But of course, he had the power, didn't he? He had the power. Sly Stone, 1943 to 2025. We salute you, sir. And that's been my tribute to one of the greats.